Hello, class. This is chapter 2, and the last chapter that you have to read read and study for week 1. And so, chapter 2, culture giving meaning to the human lives. Cultural conflicts over mascots. In what ways are Native American mascots celebrations of Indian culture? In what ways do they denigrate these cultures? This is something that has been talked about quite often as of late, with a lot of Native American groups not liking the fact that their culture has been co-opted, like the Washington Redskins. It's very denigrating to the culture. But we'll also talk about it a little bit more as we go through this chapter. So, culture. For anthropologists, culture refers to the perspectives and actions that a group of people consider natural and self-evident. What does the concept of culture help explain the differences and similarities in people's ways of lives? Interesting question. So, what is culture? Is culture something that can be owned? Is culture expressed through social institutions? So, what we do know about culture is definitely learned. It uses different symbols. It is dynamic and integrated with daily experiences or norms, and it is shared by groups of people and passed along from generation to generation. There are many theories of culture. Elements of culture tend to share key anthropological theories. And so culture is definitely learned, symbols, dynamic, always adapting and always changing, is integrated into our daily experiences. Culture shapes everyday life. It's shared, and understanding culture involves an overcoming ethnocentrism. Because if you're sitting there saying, well, that's totally weird and totally wrong, there's no way of actually looking at it and kind of going through it and being able to understand why they're doing whatever it is they're doing. So, enculturation. This is the process of learning cultural roles and logic of society, which begins at birth. And so, look at this wonderful little artistic character. Which way did you read it? Did you read it the same way that I drew my line? Yeah, that's because we're enculturated to read from left to right. This is not always the case, but it is how we in America were enculturated to start reading. And so, symbol. An object, idea, image, figure, or character that represents something else. So that would be a heart. When we typically see a heart, we think awe, love. It's definitely a symbol. Goethe's interpretive theory of culture is embodied and transmitted through symbols. So he's basically saying that symbols are the way that we are able to reproduce and recognize what culture is. Today's anthropologists study culture as a dynamic process definitely not a static thing. They pay close attention to relations of power and inequality in their analysis of cultural processes. So, what exactly is culture? A cross-cultural perspective demonstrates the incredible flexibility and plasticity of human species. Human belief and practices come in all shapes and forms. So we definitely want to understand that there are complete differences, but they tend to have a lot of similarities as well. And we just have to look at them and be able to see that. So it is a key to understanding how the whole of culture operates. So and definitely there's an interrelation between the social, economic, and belief structures. So everyone has culture. We tend to notice culture more when they are different from those we are familiar with. And the US tend to view those who are different from white middle class norms as having culture. Different patterns from mainstream patterns, a group of cultures more visible. The more culture one has, appears to have, the less power one wields. So, and what this is saying is that we tend in the US to at least think about and those that are different from this place of power, being white, typically male and middle class, as having less culture, being more cultured and therefore less powerful. It goes back to our racist history, and yeah. So, culture is shared. People make sense of their worlds and order their lives by participating in social groups. Today, culture may be transmitted face-to-face or virtually using a variety of technological innovations. And this is honestly what I study. I'm a digital anthropologist, so I study online communities and how they create cultural normativity and express that. Cultural construction. People collectively build meaning through common experiences and negotiation. The construction derives from past collective experiences in the community, as well as lots of people talking about it, thinking about it, acting and responding to a common set of goals and problems. So, cultural relativism. And this is the interpreting another culture using their goals, values, and beliefs rather than your own. So you have to look at the cultural belief that's different than yours from their point of view, not from yours. And that's very important. So this does not necessarily mean accepting and defending all things people do, but it does mean that you're not judging it. Culture defined. So culture consists of collective processes that make the artificial seem natural. This emphasizes the feeling of naturalness people experience about their beliefs and actions are humanly constructed and variable across social groups and can change somewhat quickly. Since culture is dynamic, an emergent process based on social relationships, anthropologists study the ways cultures are created and recreated. And that's important because we are constantly recreating our culture and normativity by producing it. And it's dynamic in that we don't do things the exact same way, and that creates and changes the normativity. So, why does it feel so stable? Societies function most smoothly when cultural processes feel natural and stable. We need that stability. Enculturation is constantly occurring. It might start at birth, but it doesn't end until you do. So the experience of culture is repeatedly stabilized by symbols, values, norms, and traditions. These are the ways in which we constantly recreate our culture. Symbols. As I said before, symbols are references to other things. They don't necessarily have to mean or look like they mean something in order for them to actually mean that. So a symbol is something that conventionally and arbitrarily stands for something else. Symbols do not change, do change, and sometimes extremely dramatically, but they tend to be very stable, they're easy to remember, and they preserve a cultural's conventional meanings. So symbols, values are symbolic expressions of intrinsic desires, principles, or qualities, tend to conserve a society's dominant ideas about morality and social issues. They can change, but they are more slow than other aspects of culture. We see this currently with the acceptance of LGBTQ plus marriages and the fight that's still going on for that to be considered normal and equal. So norms. You will hear me say this word quite often throughout the semester. Um, Norms are typical patterns of behavior, the unwritten rules of everyday life. These remain stable because people learn them from an early age and because society encourages the conformity of these. They are usually unnoticed by people until they are violated. That would be like, you wouldn't notice that you pick up a spoon immediately when you have a bowl of soup until someone picks up a fork. And then you're like, you're gonna eat soup with a fork? And be kind of confused by it. Same thing. That is a norm. Try to think about what you can just up off the top of your head. Think of a norm. What are they? Can you think of any? So, traditions. These are the most enduring and ritualized aspects of culture. They are usually assumed to be timeless, or at the very least old, making challenging traditions difficult, even if they justify actions that make no sense in modern times. And we see that a lot as well in our daily lives. We're trying to make a lot of changes, but like the tradition of the mother staying home, being barefoot and pregnant and blah, 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 to women being powerful CEOs. Traditions don't have to be just like what you do at Christmas or Easter or Thanksgiving or Hanukkah or Kwanzaa. They can be normal daily life things as well. Culture is expressed through social institutions. So culture feels stable because it is expressed and reinforced by these social institutions. The organized set of social relationships that link individuals to each other is structured way in a particular society. These institutions include, but are not limited to, kinship and marriage, economic, religious, and political. So, functionalism, the cultural practice and beliefs the preformed functions for society, explaining how the world works, organizing people into efficient roles, etc. Social institutions function together to keep society functioning smoothly and minimize social change. So there are a lot of critics of functionalism that it's too associated with natural sciences and viewing culture as too stable and smoothly functioning. So holism, elements of functionalism are still used by modern cultural anthropologists, especially in its holistic perspective. So this aims to identify and understand the whole, that is the systematic connection between individual cultural beliefs and practices rather than the individual parts. And so we don't want to just know about how the pandemic is going to affect us biologically, because we also need to know culturally how it's going to affect us. And then is it going to affect our language? Possibly, because we're all going digital now. And we're having to have these masks on. Is that going to change how we communicate? Because we can't see the person's mouth anymore. So, why cereal? And this is one of those fun things where you get to try to be an anthropologist and kind of understand holism. So, Kellogg invented cornflakes to prevent unhealthy sexual urges such as masturbation. In the 19th century, hearty breakfasts was a sign of prosperity and was a result of full-bodied body types. Early 20th century, Americans began to value a healthier diet and leaner body type. Breakfast cereals became a more desirable option. 1920s, the breakfast cereal industry boomed and was completely detached from any idea about sexual deviance. Today, cereals remain a breakfast norm. So, it went from cornflakes went to being a way of preventing unhealthy sexual urges, to a hearty breakfast for the nice full figured, to a lean option, to today's norm. Interesting way of looking at it. So, can anyone own culture? No one can own the collective process that makes the artifact seem natural. Conflicts do arise over the claims of exclusive rights to use of symbols, giving cultural power and meaning. There was an example, and I can't remember it now, so talk about it later probably. Cultural appropriation, unilateral decision of one social group to take control over symbols, practices, or objects of another. So go ahead and review this chapter just a little bit. I will put up the document that has all the terminology as well as the definitions that are in this chapter that I believe are very important. So go ahead and make sure that you have done your discussion post, responded to 2 peers, as well as do the quiz. And we will see you next week.